Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Phoenix Generation podcast. I'm Lua Hancock, the Vice President of the Ginsberg Family Foundation for the Phoenix Generation. If you're new to us, the Phoenix Generation is the youth activation arm of the Central Florida Pledge, which if you haven't signed it yet, what are you waiting for? Yeah, so go sign that. We work with local high school and college students at a lot of the different local high schools and colleges to help them, to help their peers learn how to have dialogue with people who are different than yourselves, how to grow their level of curiosity, how to grow their level of tolerance with ideas that are different than theirs, and how to know about their own conflict resolution and how to do conflict resolution. We believe that for this generation, that's not only a personal skill that's beneficial, but it also will turn out to be a skill good for them in the marketplace, professional skill that they can bring. So this episode is part of a two-part series on intergenerational communication and how to increase a new term to me, your generational intelligence, which I like. We're going to talk about that today. Intergenerational communication in our own homes, in our own lives, in our workplaces happens all the time. I'm not sure we think about it enough. And we think about our own biases enough. So I'm super excited to be spending this time together. If you haven't listened to the other episode, please do. We have lots of guests from different generations talking about their own generations. But in this episode, we're specifically going to talk to our two guests, local Central Florida leaders who have knowledge on generational difference, generational intelligence, and history. We also talk a little bit about, which you both have in common, how this might overlap with spirituality or purpose and making purposeful decisions. I love that both of you think about that as well as intergenerational work. So I am going to do brief bios. I thought about shortening them even more, but both of y'all deserve a moment just to talk about what you would do. And I knew if I had to introduce yourselves, you would do it lightweight. So I don't usually do the whole bio, but I feel really lucky now for a couple years to have been able to work with Dr. Joel Hunter. He is a prominent community leader. You might know him from all kinds of things, from Northland, from currently he's the pastor of community benefit. I love that title, the pastor of community benefit.
I made it up.
I love it.
I made it up.
I get it though.
Yeah.
That's needed.
Yeah.
The pastor of community benefit at Action Church, and he is the chairman of the Central Florida Pledge campaign, which calls all residents to action. Anybody who's tired of hateful discourse and wants to create an inclusive community for all, we welcome you. I love that very clearly in his bio, which I think is great. He says that he's not partisan or politically oriented and that his ministry is often in public policy. This has been, I think, an interesting way then for multiple leaders of multiple partisan areas to feel comfortable with having you work with them in a pastoral role, which I think is really interesting. He was the spiritual advisor to President Obama, writing weekly devotions for him and praying with him periodically. And I know Joel would never say this, but he was Orlando Magazine's #1 most powerful voice in philanthropy and community engagement. I mention all that not to say accolades, but just to say that I have known Joel long enough to know that community engagement and community impact is just how he lives his life. There is no other option in his view. This is what we are called to do. And so that is how he lives every day. So I'm grateful to get to work with you and grateful that you're here today.
I got you.
Yeah. So that's Joel. Also, for several years, I have been able to work off and on with Allie, very soon to be Dr. Scott. Allie Scott is a leader and strategist. She runs the Allie Scott Agency, which is a platform dedicated to elevating organizational culture, intergenerational communication, and purpose-driven leadership, which I love. I know we were both at Stetson, not at the same time, but we've become friendly anyway. She is the director of development at Stetson, leading major gift strategy. She will not ask for money today on the podcast, but she knows how to. And she's an adjunct professor in the School of Business teaching professional communications. When she told me that she's the creator of this framework, GENtentional Leadership, and how we raise our intergenerational IQ for intentional communication, purpose aligned, inclusive work, I was like, tell me more. Yeah. Let's do this. Yeah. How do we do this? So I'm so grateful that you are here today as well.
I'm happy to be here.
And, we were just talking about generation. So I apologize to be this generation. We all are, but I have the questions for you all on my phone. So let me pull those up and we'll have a conversation here. And so excited for you finishing your doctorate, which will be on workplace spirituality and job satisfaction. So yeah, we'll read it when you're done.
It is exciting, and I tried to make it relatable, for all of us, because, it's about how we can bring ourselves to make meaning and be in community with each other and love what we do. So
that's awesome. Yeah. We met through a mutual friend, and anyone who I meet through that mutual friend, I'm friends with.
Yes.
So
instantly we clicked.
Instantly. So I love that. So, yes, thank you both for coming today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, this is a really important topic. Some people there don't even know. So tell me a little bit, we'll start with Ali. Tell me a little bit about what are the different generations even? Like, what does that mean when we say generation?
Sure. So right now, I guess, in what we know in our history or in our current state, we have the silent generation. And so, for example, my grandmother, well, she's considered an old silent, because she's 100. So she's 2 years before the silent generation. So that's around 1928, 27, 28. Silent generation gave birth to baby boomers. Baby boomers gave birth to Gen Xers. That's my generation. Gen Xers gave birth to millennials. Millennials gave birth to Gen Z, and Gen Z, it just goes, beyond, well, I guess didn't give birth, but, kind of came through. And then we have Gen Alpha, and that's the youngest. And so they were born around 2013. They're mashing the gas. They're on the way. So, it's a great time to be alive, I think, because you have the benefit of just so many different experiences that have happened and shaped in all of these generations. You think about, I'm Gen X. And so my history classes talked about World War I and World War II. Well, having a grandmother who is currently alive and who is 100, she can share those experiences coming out of, a child at World War I, but also having a grandfather who served in World War II, and then having parents who served in the civil rights era. And then, me being a latchkey kid, and then my nieces and nephews growing up as technology natives. And then my youngest niece, who is 4, having the benefit of hearing all of those stories from 100 years ago. It's, such a great time to be alive, because we really have the opportunity to engage in a way that many generations may have missed just because of the amount of people that are living at a certain time.
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Hunter, maybe you can tell me from your research and your own personal lived perspective. I find it fascinating that intergenerational differences are still something that people will just out loud talk about stereotypically, right? Mm-hmm. I work in workplaces where people will talk very negatively about the youngest generation. Yeah. Oh, they're lazy. They don't care. They're all, uber concerned about their mental health. They're snowflake, right? And generations will, it's become a thing to be like, hey, boomer, right? That's not a positive, but we just say it out loud. Why is it that we have so much intergenerational stereotype or difference in your view?
It's always been that way. You go back to the writings of Aristotle. They're criticizing the younger generation in their day. Yeah. So it's part of how we define ourselves, part of how we're proud of our distinctives, but also we have great hope in some of the distinctives that we see right around the corner. I did my undergraduate work in history and government, and so I was brought up very much like Ali was saying, with stories, family stories. My grandparents talked about what it was like going through the Depression. My parents talked about what was it like going through World War II. Part of my study was Arthur Schlesinger was a part of JFK's administration, great historian. He wrote a book called Cycles in American History. And Schlesinger's proposal was that every generation, 20 to 30 years, there's a cycle in American history that either reacts against or expands, what came before it. Mostly both. They react against and expand. There are things that will always kind of be there. When I was growing up, the motto was never trust anybody over 30, because it was like the older generation is suspect. They're in it for themselves. You can see some of the same dynamic today in the distrust of institutions, in the skepticism about how things are done and whether or not people are willing to change, or everybody's just out for themselves. So basically, I guess the answer to that, it's human nature in striving to define your place in this world, to differentiate yourself from someone else, not always using the highest praise for the other. So,
well, that's what I wonder. Like, we know, many of us, that diversity is our strength. And we know that, certainly there are some stereotypes and maybe they have some kernel of truth in them, right? In these different generational approaches. But we also know that we're better together. But the generational thing seems, a little one that we have not, fully figured out how to take the full benefit from.
Yeah.
I also think some of what you're talking about, right, is just developmental theory. We are also different at the ages we are. So every older generation has said that the youth are problematic.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is true as well. I do think, man, it is so fascinating. Like, even myself, you are my dad's generation. My dad was in Vietnam, and then he came back and he was a civil rights activist. Him and my mom were like very, really about the civil rights movement. I know this to be true, you know what I mean? So I was raised in this context. But then I think, man, my kids are having a totally different experience. Some of the defining things of my generation, for example, were like the Challenger explosion. Right? My generation knows this, right? This was it. My kids' generation, it was so interesting. Like, they saw Black Panther, Wonder Woman movies, the Me Too movement. They live here. So they saw Trayvon Martin's killing, right? They saw... And I think, man, I did not at those developmental ages have that level of context about what was happening in my community. So what do we know to be true? I mean, you're researching this right now about the differences in the generation, especially these younger generations, which we think of sometimes in a negative sense. What do we know about what they're bringing positively?
One of the reasons why I think I have evolved into this space is because I remember clearly feeling like, oh my goodness, Gen Z drives me nuts. I grew up in a household, where, both my parents were educators. And so they would always say, when something irritates you, it's probably because you need to know a little bit more information about it.
Yeah, good.
And so I remember telling my mom a few years ago, oh my gosh, Gen Z is driving me crazy. I was teaching a college class, and, kind of just to back up, I used to teach elementary school. And so I remember clearly Gen Z being in elementary school. And then I got out of teaching elementary school, and then got into higher ed. So now I'm seeing my elementary school students now in college. And I'm thinking, what happened? And then I had to think, to your question about what were some things that were defining? Well, the pandemic. And so the way that they communicated as young children had to pivot during the pandemic. And so they did school online, virtually. So the way that they communicated totally shifted. So they had to respond to that. I did too, but that's called Gen judgment, you have generational intelligence, but then you have generational judgment. And so I clearly, I'm transparent enough to share that I carried some of those, judgments, saying, they don't talk. Why aren't they connecting? What's wrong with them? Instead of, let's open this present and see what's inside. And the way that I did that, my class came in and I said, before we do anything, I need to ask you all a question. Help me understand you.
Good.
And they had the Gen Z face is real, where it's a stare. And so one of the students said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I walked into the classroom And this is how you all were looking at me.
Mm.
And I said, I thought you thought I was wasting your time. And the student reacted. And I said, and I thought you thought she needs to just go wherever she came from. And I thought you thought, I wish she were dead. And they started talking back, and and they were mortified that that was my perception.
That's so good.
Because
So good.
yeah, it was so interesting because my experience being Gen X is you make eye contact. I can hear my parents saying that, it's a sign of trust, and you open your mouth and you introduce yourself. When you walk into a room, you speak. If an authority figure walks in the room, you show verbally and physically that you've acknowledged them and you respect them. I said, let's just talk. And so the 3 students that I shared what I thought about them, they said, first of all, I'm sorry, because that's not how I was feeling. And I said, well, why do you think that that's a thing? Because it's out there. Look it up. The Gen Z face. Look it up. I had never heard of, most of them had never heard of the Gen Z face. I said, why do you think? And so one of my students raised his hand and he said, Professor, we have grown up in an educational system where we started off talking to each other, and then recess was taken away, so we stopped playing. And then we replaced books with computers. It was screen time. And then we all got phones for Christmas, or not all got phones for Christmas, but it was an infusion of technology. The cars we rode in might have had televisions. So you see, we're backing up from communicating. And it's created this nonverbal that this generation beautifully carries, because now I have an understanding that it's not them they weren't looking at me like that because that's how they were feeling. That was the result of their experiences. And we're all a result of our experiences, which is what you shared, Joel. And so that awareness now, so a few weeks after that, they would come by, my office, or I would see them in the dining hall, and they're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so had the craziest Gen Z face I've ever seen in my life. They didn't even know. Now we're working through it because it's about understanding and having empathy and making sure, are you okay? Is your face just blank because you're not thinking, or are you really going through something?
Could I just play off what she's just talking about? Because I want to contrast this generation with the Zoomer with the Boomer.
Yeah.
First of all, point out to the fact that we're all trying to figure out how to deal with what scares us.
That's right.
We all live with insecurities, but the generations experience those differently. Nobody ever asked us growing up in the Boomer generation how we felt about anything. It was like, did you get your work done? Are you causing trouble? Did you get in trouble? Because if you got in trouble, when you get home, you're in more trouble. And the threats were huge. The threats were communism. People were building bomb shelters in their backyards.
Right.
The threats were so institutional. They were mostly outside the United States, although with Joe McCarthy, the communist scare came inside the United States. But the point was that we were dealing with huge national issues. In this generation, there is more of a struggle with more personal challenges, with identity, with mental health, with otherness. How does that make you feel? And, when I was growing up, no one went to counselor. There were no counselors. It was like, okay, you can go. Part of my doctorate, I worked with at the Central State Hospital for the mentally insane. I mean, we institutionalized people with psychotic episodes. But other than that, it was like, pull up your belt, tough it out, get back to work, And so one of the reasons I'm excited about this generation is that in my generation, and I was a part of the civil rights movement as well, and those were huge issues. There were entire races of people that were being excluded. And I remember there was a sense of patriotism about this is the kind of nation we want to build. We don't want to go on excluding people, giant races and giant religions of people, just because they're not in the mainstream. And we fought that battle and we changed that history somewhat. Now we come to this generation where the battles are much more personal. The fragments are multitudes of problems. The groups divide themselves, but they don't have my generation had kind of hardening of the categories. Everybody's in a category. This generation, because they're on the screen, are kind of automatically inclusive. I mean, they may have their own social group that they relate to, but there's never a time when they don't have access to everything that's going on in the world.
Absolutely.
And what's going on in society. And so I see the potential of this generation of doing what my generation did in the civil rights movement. I see them having the capacity to face these large moral questions. And that's what they are. When you treat somebody with disrespect, when you decide that you want to dominate someone, or your efforts need to go toward your own power for yourself and your own group, that's a moral question. And I sense in this generation the same moral comprehension that we want to be fair for everybody. We want everybody to have a sense of belonging. We want everybody to understand that whether or not we agree, and we probably won't, we still will all be treated the same. So it's just such a different venue, but the same question, how do you treat people?
I will say, even just from my generation to my kids' generation, and I think this is different, maybe urban or rural as well, a little bit, but they know people of different categories personally.
Yes.
So when you talk about the general issues, they're not just general issues. They have a name attached to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So this thought about allyship is a whole different ballgame because, and you want to talk about like no categories. I mean, even for my generation, we did believe that, there should be equality between racial categories or religious categories. My kids, I realized I had this moment with them that I realized how different things are. That I was talking to them a little bit about the birds and the bees when they were age appropriate to be talking about it. And they had additional questions because they have friends who have two moms and they have friends who have two dads and they wanted to know. And I was like, oh man, and they know loving families who so it's really interesting where I work with this generation all the time. And I will say recently, while we're recording this, is Allie's birthday week coming up, but also Thanksgiving coming up. We've been doing a program on multiple college campuses called Home for the Holidays, where we ask students to talk about things that will be challenging at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I've been to 3 of these now within the past week or so, and it is fascinating. So here's one thing I've seen. They can't wait. They feel like that generations above them are not creating enough space, enough organized space to, without hurting someone's feelings or knowing how to do this from a place of curiosity, to talk about deeper stuff. That was actually what the data showed also after, the Hamas attack on Israel, was that the students said the whole next year, why did no one on my campus talk about it enough? They were so afraid that we didn't know how to navigate this, that no one helped us. So we have been talking about everything from premarital sex to, AI to abortion. And when I tell you students have been like, I am so grateful that I have this space to talk about what I think, to listen to someone who thinks differently than me. To just this last week at UCF, so there was a debate between these youth about AI. And one of them said, man, I haven't really talked about AI with artists before tonight. And I have a different view now on what you're sharing, these things. Also, you have people say, listen, I struggle with some of my thoughts about abortion. I think about it this way religiously, but I wonder, the students who work for me also, I realized after the first year, we pay scholarships for them to do their work. A bunch of them didn't do the scholarship request. So I asked them about it and they said, I just wanted the mentorship. I just wanted the education to know how to do this. I just wanted the training to engage in society in the way my heart and head tells me that we should be. I find that so awesome. It also puts a responsibility on other generations. Yeah.
I think this generation, the Gen Z generation, is very self-aware. They're aware. I think technology has a lot to do with it because when you think about how they comment on what other people post, they look at how people comment on and interact with what they post or what they put out there. So they're used to responding. So I think, they're very interactive in that way. Our generation grew up with video games. Our video games we played Pac-Man based on how the algorithm of the video game was designed. Yeah. Now, my nephew can play video games with people that live in China or live in South Africa, and they're playing a video game together. They're talking to each other. Yeah. Whereas that was not heard of. It was unheard of.
This is so interesting because, again, my generation was taught, don't talk to strangers. Don't share your family business. That's somebody else's business.
That's right.
We were the least self-aware people. We were taught, don't think of yourself. You think of the other person.
Joe, what generation are you?
I'm a boomer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a boomer. And so basically it was live and let live, except we were all kind of trapped in our own category. I grew up in a town, all white. I mean, no brown, no other religion. I mean, we had one Jewish person. She was my Latin teacher, and that was it. And when I went to college, I immediately got involved in the civil rights movement because I felt this is so. I mean, I'm not learning anything. I need to learn differences. But it's very different from this. This is so much healthier when people talk and they share ideas. And when Pulse happened, I had no gay friends. When 9/11 happened, I had no Muslim friends. And so the first thing I did is I went and got in a conversation so that I could have a friend of somebody different. But I had grown up. I wasn't even aware I didn't have any Muslim friends. Right. I wasn't even aware I didn't have any gay friends until that happened. So that's what's so much more healthy about this generation.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's also, I would love to give our listeners some tips too. So you studied increasing your generational IQ. What are some practical things that we can do? Because to even the point that you made about not having Muslim friends, once you have awareness, so hopefully today we've raised awareness that we might not realize that we're interacting with generations in maybe different ways. So what do we do about that?
I didn't come up with GENtentional. That's out there. It's floating. My spin to help kind of understand it, I've capitalized the GENtentional to help, I guess, bring clarity to understanding what it's about. But G really means you need to get grounded within it, grounded in understanding that there are a lot of intersections to understanding generations. I mean, because to your point, I mean, it's understanding generations is not a strategy. It is a practice. So it's not we're going to come up with these ways to understand each other. No, it's a practice and empathy. It's a practice in understanding humanity and how we can come together, understand each other better, interact with each other, be able to belong, connect, have meaning, build these relationship-rich experiences. So we have to get grounded in understanding that that's clearly what it's about. It's about elevating and evolving, because once we get grounded, then we have the base, and then it will help us to evolve and elevate. to be able to understand. So take Joel, for instance. Joel had to sit with the gaps. You sat with the gaps and said, okay, I don't have friends that are this way. I don't have friends that are that way, but you have friends. And so at the end, in the beginning of the day, it's about connecting with people. And so once you are grounded and you connect with people, you can elevate. And then now you're starting to evolve. And then once you evolve, the end is nurture. You need to now take care of that. Take care of those relationships that you've made with each other, because it's all about relationships. And the intentional is you're doing all of this with intentionality. So you're being very thoughtful in how you understand people. Like my example with my students, I was frustrated. I think it's okay to say you're frustrated, but that's something that I learned from Gen Z. Gen Z will tell you when they're frustrated. My generation, Gen X, might have been a little more timid.
Mm-hmm.
Boomers,
Never let them see you sweat.
never let them. That's absolutely.
That's our motto.
Yeah.
So we're not open.
Yeah. So we're evolving as a generation, I mean, as a group. Never let you sweat.
It's young generations like, we all sweat, and by the way, I glitter.
Exactly. Right.
I think we sometimes judge that, but I think we're a little jealous of it. Like I joke, my generation, the generation after me is so much better at thinking about their work-life balance.
Yes.
Their holistic stuff.
That's millennials.
But what do we think about that? That is lazy and, in our worst selves.
Yes.
But sometimes if I were to check myself, I realize I'm jealous of that because I'm not balanced or well, because I have this definition that I'm just going to work, you know what I mean? And I'm going to be loyal to an organization. This generation has told me, who's being loyal to you? I mean, what are you,
right?
And it is not a personal thing.
Yes.
If you decide that you're going to leave an organization because, first of all, their values don't align with yours, or they won't let you stay working from home,
which is
if
important.
You want to do that.
Yeah.
And so we have so much to learn from each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. I remember my goddaughter, who is a millennial, telling me, and she's beautifully, matriculated through life. She's almost 30 and she's been a rock star. And, Alexis, I mean, she's doing amazing things. And she's the one who actually told me one day, she said, listen, it's all about balance. Your mental health is important. You don't burn the candle at both ends. And I'm like, what do you mean? The candle has both ends. What do you mean? The candle has two wicks. And she's like, well, it only burns if you light it. It's about balance. And I'll never forget, that was when I really understood her generation, because, and it shaped the way I talk to young people, because I remember telling someone with this newly generational intelligence information that I received, I remember saying to some emerging leaders who were looking for employment, and I said, it's very important that you are interviewing the company that you're applying to just as they are interviewing you. Now, Joel, what do you think about that? I mean, that probably doesn't feel right. You're interviewing the company? No, like you show up, you present your best.
I do the job.
Right. I'll figure it out. And, but what I've learned from millennials and Gen Z is that no, it has to be a good fit for you as well as it is for them. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, they're they're out of there.
Right.
And I think that's such a strength, because I think that's knowing your worth. That's another thing that I think it's so healthy that generations get in the same room together and we talk to each other. We need to become gentellectuals, I call it. And that's all about learning. That's getting grounded, evolving, and nurturing intentionally so that we can know who we are, what makes us tick. Why are we the way that we are? I had Joel and I were talking earlier. I was sharing with him it was the the workshop that you and I were side by side, I had them to do the generational, kind of like a roll call. So it was, if you remember having a cell phone in a bag, stand up. Mm-hmm. And so I stood, right? My mom was there. My mom stood. My best friend Rena stood. And one of our students said, wait, did they really, cell phones really come in a bag? I said, yes. And so we did all this, spent all this great time. And I was talking about not having a computer when I was in college because they weren't a thing. And students were like, oh my gosh, how'd you get your work done? But we had this beautiful exchange. Well, while that was happening, I had on a different pair of glasses. I had on the new Ray-Ban Metas. And the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, you can take a picture, you can take a video, you can listen to it, you can answer your phone. They're technology at you're living the Jetsons' dream, right? As I'm talking to them, we're talking about technology and we're talking about generations and we're talking about understanding each other. All of a sudden, someone sends me a text message and it's playing in my ear on my glasses. And I couldn't hear what the person was saying. So I said, I'm so sorry. My glasses are talking to me. One of the students was like, oh my gosh, just to think, you didn't grow up with computers and you have on glasses that are talking to you. Just to have that happen organically was just beautiful because it was an understanding of, I didn't grow up like this, but now I'm living like this.
And I think also the purpose of understanding isn't necessarily to become more like them. Mm-hmm. I like how I am. Yeah, I mean, I like my generation. I like my understanding. I like my faith. I believe my faith. I'm fervent in my faith. But it really helps me to understand someone else's faith, mm-hmm. someone else's understanding of work, mm-hmm. someone else's understanding of leisure and their lifestyle. And I think probably the key in building a healthier community mm-hmm. is being able to live in kind of a blessed ambivalence. Mm.
I like,
first of all, for a believer, it's to trust God with all, God, you got all this. You know what to do with the differences. I don't need to manage their lives. I don't need to manage anything. I trust you. All done. Mm-hmm. I can relax now. Mm-hmm. But it's more of, and I like, Lou, when you talk about curiosity, I like the fact that we can be curious so that we can learn more about, understand someone else for who they really are. Because you can't really love somebody unless you know who they really are.
Absolutely.
You're just loving your own image, mm-hmm. But there's also, there should be a sense of freedom that I don't have to be, I don't really want to go to a counselor. I got stuff to do, but I love it that you go to a counselor because you love that. And I'm rooting for you. I just am from a generation where we have no balance in work and life and are not looking for any. I do family and I do work. Thank you very much. And I'm a really happy guy, but I want everyone else to have what they need because that is, mm-hmm. I think that's the universal moral component that you respect people for who they are. You learn from who they are and you understand more about who they are and you wish them the very best mm-hmm. in who they are. But it doesn't necessarily lead to a conversion away from who you are unless it's super unhealthy and sure. so on and so forth. So the whole idea of pluralism instead of negotiating differences or becoming more like each other, I think really gives us a freedom.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, having done this work with youth and studied conflict resolution, you start to hear patterns, of theory and lived practice. One of them is what you mentioned, and you mentioned as well, which is groundedness. I know myself. Mm-hmm. I like myself. Mm-hmm. When I talk to you, it is not threatening to me mm-hmm. personally. Mm-hmm. I can come at it with a sense of curiosity. Mm-hmm. So that interaction between our personal work, whether you want to call that spiritual work or values work or whatever, and our interpersonal work is very clear to me. Yeah. I think, another one is, yes, I actually, once I learned about this, might change my mind about it, but we call this sometimes like in college, but either way, it's going to thicken my thinking. And I like that. I like that I'm going to learn something that's going to help me in the way I interact next. Whether I change my mind or not is a different thing. I might actually decide I've never thought of it that way.
Right.
But I hope what it does is it actually thickens our thinking to realize that there's so much complexity to these issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, we are running short on time, but I wanted to ask you, Joel, if you have worked in this space of community building, which includes intergenerational building, includes interfaith building, and includes, inter-economic status building for so long, and you've helped literally some of the country's leaders to do this. What is your wisdom to our listeners about this building of community? Because I genuinely feel, and you and I have talked about this, so many people believe in the golden rule. So many people want to live the golden rule, right? And are struggling to figure out how to make real impact.
Yeah.
So what's your advice, or what has been your lived experience about how we can live the golden rule, not just believe it?
Yeah. Well, I am so optimistic about the future. And I just think we are at a place where, because of some of the harshness and the division and the hostility and the animosity of our culture, that is going to prompt all of us to be more involved, because we don't want that kind of community for ourselves or for our children. And so I'm just super pumped. I think all things work together for good. And I do think, especially here in Central Florida, with the pledge leading the way, I think we have a watershed moment in history where, because of a community response, a community solution, a community-based solution, we don't have to solve the world's problems. We don't have to solve the nation's problems. We don't have to solve the state's problem, but we can build a community that we want. And I couldn't be more enthusiastic about doing that and seeing signs of this all over the place.
Yes, I agree. We were talking to the students this week. If you enjoyed the conversation we had on campus tonight, which they did, it's supposed to be a program for an hour and a half. 3 hours later, I was like, y'all got to.
I love it.
I know.
I love it. That's a good time.
And in a culture where I think time is our biggest asset sometimes, to ask people, could you create space for a deeper conversation with someone else leaving here today? Could you meet your neighbor? Could you? And people think I'm crazy because I do meet my neighbors and talk to them.
I do too.
Yeah. And, I've chosen to let love lead me, not fear, right? Yes. So could something happen? Maybe. But also, if I didn't do it, something's going to happen too. So I'd rather risk it.
That's right.
The positive. So yeah, I think that to create space, which we also try to do on this podcast, for everyone to just be able to pause for a second and think about deeply, but also strategically a little bit. I loved your comment. So I'm going to kind of bring it back and close with it, that intergenerational work, community work is not a strategy.
No,
it is a practice.
That's right.
Right? So I think if that's the one thing even that people take from today, to be in action in some way, to decide to be in practice, which is how we can really start to reflect, is when we've tried something, then that's good. I feel so grateful to be in this space with both of you. And to our listeners, please, share the good news. If you thought that this was helpful, share it with someone else. Either way, start a deeper conversation.
Yes.
Meet someone, talk to someone, start a deeper conversation, and, be a part of building the community you want to see. I love that. This is what's going to drive us. So thank you so much to our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our listeners, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Thanks so much.